All right, so today we're going to get kind of microscopic, like really zoom in on this tiny protein that's doing a ton of work inside our cells.
Yeah, it's actually pretty amazing how much one little protein can impact, like our health and even how our brains function.
Exactly. And the protein we're diving into today is called VCP.
VCP.
And get this, when it's not working properly, it's linked to some serious neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and ALS.
It's true. And we're using a 2023 scientific review article to really dig into all the details about VCP.
Yeah, so we'll be exploring what VCP does, like its normal job in the cell and then how things go wrong and lead to these diseases.
And then we'll even get into, what kind of research is being done to try to target VCP and maybe even develop new therapies.
Exactly. This is cutting edge stuff, folks. So by the end of this, you'll have a much better understanding of this crucial protein and why it's so important for brain health.
Absolutely. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is VCP and what makes it so essential?
Yeah, that's a good place to start.
Well, VCP stands for Valosin-containing protein, and it's a type 2 ATPase. So basically, it uses energy to perform these really important tasks inside the cell.
Got it.
One of its main roles is acting as a chaperone protein.
Chaperone protein.
Yeah. And you can kind of think of it like,
Like a babysitter or something.
well, yeah, sort of. It helps other proteins, like fold into the right shape.
To do their jobs.
Exactly. It prevents them from clumping together, which can be really bad, and it even helps get rid of them when they're damaged.
So it's like a quality control expert, making sure all the proteins are behaving themselves.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And here's the really cool part. VCP is found in tons of organisms,
Like what?
like everything from yeast to worms to flies and, of course, humans.
So it must be pretty important if it's been around that long.
Absolutely. It shows that VCP plays a super fundamental role in keeping cells alive and functioning.
I'm getting the feeling that VCP is kind of a busybody involved in a lot of stuff.
Oh, you have no idea. VCP is a multitasking master. It's involved in a ton of cellular processes, many of which are really important when we're talking about, the nervous system and neurodegeneration.
Okay, so let's get into that. What are some of the key roles that VCP plays, especially those connected to brain health?
All right. Well, a major one is protein degradation, which is basically getting rid of old or damaged proteins.
It's like taking out the trash.
Exactly. And VCP is essential for the two main systems that do this in the cell. They're called the ubiquitin proteasome system, or UPS, and the autophagy lysosomal pathway, or ALP.
Those are some serious acronyms.
I know, right? But the important thing is that these systems are crucial for keeping the cell clean and healthy.
So if VCP isn't working right, then these trash removal systems get messed up.
Exactly. And when that happens, all sorts of things can go wrong because those damaged proteins start to build up.
And that can lead to problems.
Yeah, big problems like neurodegenerative diseases.
So like Alzheimer's disease, where you get those plaques in the brain?
Exactly. Those plaques are made up of these misfolded proteins that haven't been cleared out properly.
Wow. So VCP is involved in protein degradation, keeping things clean. Anything else?
Oh, there's more. VCP is also really important for keeping certain parts of the cell healthy, called organelles.
Organelle.
Yeah, like the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of the cell, and the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER, which is involved in making proteins and lipids.
So VCP is like the maintenance crew, making sure everything's running smoothly.
Pretty much. It helps make sure those organelles are functioning correctly and efficiently.
That's impressive.
Oh, and we haven't even touched on its role in stress granules.
Stress granules.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird name, but basically they're like little storage units that pop up when the cell is under stress.
Oh, okay.
So imagine, a factory suddenly gets flooded with orders. They need a place to temporarily hold some of the materials until things calm down.
Gotcha. So stress granules are like the overflow warehouse.
Exactly. And VCP helps regulate these stress granules, making sure they form when needed and then disappear when the stress is over.
Because if they stick around too long, that could be a problem.
Right. It's like those storage units becoming permanent fixtures, cluttering up the factory floor.
And that can interfere with normal operations.
Precisely. And research has actually linked these persistent stress granules to neurodegenerative diseases.
So VCP helps the cell deal with stress and make sure things don't get out of control.
Exactly. And as you can see, this little protein is involved in a lot of really important processes.
It's like the ultimate multitasker, but I'm guessing when it malfunctions, things can go wrong in a lot of different ways.
You're absolutely right. And that's what we're going to dive into next. We'll explore what happens when there are mutations in the VCP gene and how that can lead to a whole range of diseases.
I'm ready when you are.
So when we talk about VCP mutations in disease, one of the most common ones that comes up is multisystem proteinopathy 1, or MSP1.
MSP1, that's a mouthful. What is that exactly?
It's a pretty rare disorder, but it affects, multiple systems in the body, hence the name.
Okay.
Yeah. So people with MSP1, they often have muscle weakness problems with their bones and even dementia.
So it's not just the brain that's impacted.
Right. It really does have multiple systems. And a key characteristic of MSP1 is the presence of these ubiquitin-positive inclusions.
Ubiquitin-positive inclusions. Now, those sound familiar.
You should remember how VCP plays a role in that ubiquitin proteasome system, the UPS.
Yeah, it's like the tag team that marks damaged proteins for disposal.
Exactly. So when VCP isn't working the way it should, those tagged proteins, they can start to accumulate and form these inclusions, which can be toxic to cells.
So it's like the cleanup crew is on strike and the trash is piling up everywhere, causing all sorts of problems.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, these inclusions often contain RNA binding proteins, which further disrupts things inside the cell.
So it's a double whammy.
Pretty much. And while MSP1 is the most common disease linked to VCP mutations, there are others, like ALS.
ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease.
That's the one. And in ALS, we often see VCP mutations causing problems with the protein called TDP43.
TDP43, that's a new one. What does that do?
So TDP43 normally hangs out in the nucleus of the cell, the control center where it helps regulate gene expression.
Okay.
But in ALS, we see it forming clumps outside the nucleus in the cytoplasm.
So it's like it's gone rogue, wandered off from its post.
Exactly. It's not where it's supposed to be, and that causes all sorts of trouble. This mislocalization of TDP43 is a hallmark of ALS.
And VCT mutations are somehow involved in this.
Researchers are still trying to work out all the details, but it seems like VCP mutations can contribute to this mislocalization of TDP43.
It's incredible how one tiny protein can have such a widespread impact. So are there any other neurodegenerative diseases linked to VCP mutations?
Yeah, there are. We've seen connections to Parkinson's disease, Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, type 2Y, and there's even some evidence suggesting a link to Alzheimer's disease.
So it's like this one malfunctioning protein can trigger a domino effect leading to all these different problems.
That's a good way to think about it. And it highlights just how interconnected everything is within the cell. We can't just focus on one protein in isolation. We have to consider the whole system.
Right. So if mutations directly in the VCP gene can cause all of this, are there other ways VCP can contribute to disease even without a direct mutation?
You're on the right track.
Hmm.
Even when VCP mutations aren't the primary cause, they can still act as modifiers.
Modifiers, what does that mean?
It means they can influence how severe a disease is or how quickly it progresses. Think of it like this. Imagine two houses, both built with some minor flaws. One house is in a calm, sheltered area, while the other is constantly exposed to harsh weather.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
The same underlying flaws might cause just minor issues in the first house, but lead to major damage in the second.
So even if VCP isn't the main problem, it can still make things worse depending on other factors.
Exactly. And a good example of this is in polyglutamine or polyQ expansion diseases like Huntington's disease and spinocerebellar ataxia type 3.
Those are some serious conditions.
They are. And they're caused by mutations that lead to this abnormal expansion of a particular section of a protein.
And how does VCP fit into all of this?
Well, it turns out that VCP interacts with these mutated proteins, and this interaction seems to actually contribute to their toxicity.
So VCP is almost like it's helping these harmful proteins cause more damage.
In a way, yes. And it all comes back to the interconnectedness of the cellular world. It's not just about one protein going rogue. It's about the complex interplay of multiple factors.
Right, and we can't forget about things like genetics and environmental factors, which also play a role. But with all this talk about VCP and its role in these diseases, what are scientists doing about it? Are there any potential therapies on the horizon?
That's the big question. And while it's still early days, researchers are definitely working hard to understand VCP and develop potential therapies.
Well, that's good to hear. So what are some of the approaches they're exploring?
One promising avenue is developing drugs that specifically target VCP, like small molecule inhibitors.
Okay, break that down for me. What are small molecule inhibitors and how would they work?
Imagine a lock and key. The lock is a specific protein, in this case VCP, and the key is a small molecule that can bind to that lock and block its activity.
So they're designed to essentially shut down VCP. But wouldn't that be a problem considering all the important roles it plays?
That's the challenge, right? Researchers are trying to find a way to target VCP without completely shutting it down. They're looking for that sweet spot, that precise intervention point that can modify its activity without causing unintended consequences elsewhere.
That sounds incredibly difficult. Are there any other approaches they're looking at?
Yeah, another interesting area is protein-protein interaction modulators. Remember how we talked about VCP interacting with those harmful proteins in polyQ expansion diseases?
Yeah, like it was making things worse.
Exactly. So researchers are trying to develop molecules that can disrupt those specific interactions, prevent VCP from, aiding and abetting those toxic proteins.
So it's like breaking up the bad partnerships.
Exactly. And then there's another fascinating area of research that's gaining traction, personalized diets.
How does that tie into VCP?
Well, remember how we talked about VCP being involved in lipid metabolism?
Vaguely refresh my memory on that one.
Lipid metabolism is basically how our bodies process fats. And it turns out that VCP plays a role in this process, particularly in breaking down certain types of lipids.
Okay, so how does that translate into personalized diets?
Well, researchers are exploring whether dietary interventions tailored to specific VCP mutations might help manage the disease. The idea is that by understanding how a particular mutation affects VCP's function and lipid metabolism, we could adjust a person's diet to compensate for those changes.
So like a VCP-specific diet plan? That's pretty cool, though. I imagine it's still very experimental.
It is, but it's a really promising avenue, especially with the growing focus on personalized medicine tailoring treatments to an individual's unique genetic makeup and needs.
This is all very exciting. It sounds like there's real potential for treating these diseases by targeting VCP.
There is. But it's important to remember we're still in the early stages. There are a lot of challenges to overcome.
Like what are some of the big questions that scientists are still grappling with?
One of the big ones is really understanding how VCP mutations specifically affect different parts of the nervous system. We know it's involved in a lot of cellular processes, but how do those processes go wrong in different cell types and brain regions?
So it's not just about VCP malfunctioning, it's about understanding the specific consequences in different contexts.
Exactly. Another key area is figuring out the role of non-neuronal cells, like glia, in VCP-related neurodegeneration.
Glia, those are the support cells in the brain, right?
Right, they're like the nervous system support staff, providing nourishment and protection to the neurons.
Kind of like the unsung heroes of the brain always working behind the scenes.
Exactly. And there's some really interesting research suggesting that VCP mutations might actually affect glial cells too, which could contribute to the overall disease process.
So it's not just a neuron problem, it's a whole brain ecosystem problem.
It's starting to look that way. And that raises some important questions about how we approach treatment. We might need to think about targeting glial cells as well, not just neurons.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's about seeing the bigger picture.
Right. And this all ties into the big goal of personalized medicine. Can we develop treatments that are tailored to a patient-specific VCP mutation and, other individual factors?
So like being able to say, okay, you have this particular mutation, so this is the best treatment for you.
Exactly. That's the dream, to be able to personalize treatments for neurodegenerative diseases.
That would be huge. It
Right.
really feels like we're on the cusp of some major breakthroughs.
It does. There's a lot of excitement and momentum in the research community, and
Yeah.
while there are still challenges, I'm optimistic about the future.
Me too. This whole deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. It's amazing how much we've uncovered about this one tiny protein just from this review article.
It's a testament to how much progress is being made in this field.
So just to recap, we've got VCP, this incredibly busy protein that's involved in everything from, protein folding and degradation to organelle health and stress response. And then we've got these mutations that can really throw a wrench in the works, leading to a whole bunch of neurodegenerative diseases. But the good news is that scientists are hard at work trying to develop therapies that can either, fix VCP or find ways to work around its problems or even adjust our diets to compensate.
Exactly. And while we wait for those breakthroughs, there are things we can do now to potentially reduce our risk and protect our brains.
Like what kind of things?
Well, we talk about diet, and that's a big one. A healthy, balanced diet full of fruits, vegetables, omega-3 fatty acids, all of that can support brain health. And as research on VCP-specific diets progresses, we might even have more targeted dietary recommendations down the road.
So eat your greens, folks.
Exactly. There's also growing evidence that regular exercise, mental stimulation, all of these things can play a role in lowering our risk for neurodegenerative diseases.
So it's about being proactive with our brain health, just like we are with our physical health.
Absolutely. And as we learn more about VCP and all its intricate connections, we'll have even more tools at our disposal.
This has been an incredible journey into the world of VCP. Thank you so much for guiding us through this complex landscape.
It's been my pleasure. I always love sharing the wonders of cellular biology and the potential it holds for improving human health.
And to our listeners, we hope you found this deep dive into the fascinating world of VCP both enlightening and empowering. Remember, knowledge is power, and the more we understand about these incredible cellular processes, the better equipped we are to take charge of our brain health.
So stay curious, everyone, because there's a whole universe of discovery waiting out there.
Until next time, keep exploring.